I'm your host, Carolyn Solo, LCSW, EMDR therapist, and mom of three daughters. Thank you for joining me.
Hi, and welcome to episode 46 of the Future Template Parent Podcast. I am your host, Carolyn Solo, LCSW, EMDR therapist, and mom of three daughters. Thank you for joining me. So, last week we talked a bit about insurance and intensives. I hope that was fun hearing me rant about insurance. Today, I'm going to talk about the top 3 signs that you are ready to consider offering intensives in your practice. Those signs are number 1, feeling burned out. Number 2, noticing that your income isn't matching what you need. And number 3, noticing that a 50-minute session feels really short. So, with that, let's begin. So, the first sign, burnout. So, I feel like I talk about burnout a lot, probably because I have gone through it many times. I would say I'm even going through it a little bit right now. So, it feels very easy to talk about. Um, and let's just be honest about how serious of a risk burnout is in our field for therapists. How many therapists do you know who admit to some level of burnout, either currently or at some point, right? I've asked this question about burnout a bunch of times in my Instagram stories, and the response is pretty overwhelmingly that therapists are burned out or have recently been burned out or are close to being burned out. So, why, as therapists, are we particularly at risk? I think that all, service providers of any kind, all human services professionals, doctors, nurses, dentists, therapists, speech and language pathologists, occupational therapists, all those other things that I'm not thinking of, um, case managers, people working in the child welfare system, et cetera, et cetera. We are all at really high risk for burnout. And I can speak mostly to therapists because I am one. Um, Holding space for the variety of issues that land in our office every single day is just a lot, so much, right? And that we're not just like, I'm not downplaying what doctors do at all, but like, a 15-minute appointment where you're just like this, and this is maybe a different kind of burnout than hearing someone go in depth about what they're struggling with and how painful it is for 50 minutes, right? Um, Before I scaled back my practice and started offering exclusively intensives, um, when I was seeing more than 20 hours of individual clients a week, in a given day, I could have a day like this, one client with severe postpartum depression, one client with a history of severe physical abuse as a child and extreme self-esteem challenges as an adult, one client with dissociative identity disorder, one client with severe depression, history of self-harm, substance abuse and suicidality, many repeated inpatient hospitalizations, one client diagnosed with schizophrenia, and one client who had been violently sexually assaulted within the past year. That could be one day of mine. In fact, it has been a day of few. It just makes your head spin, right? Just like constantly trying to stay attuned, trying to make sure you're remembering the features of each person's story, trying to make them feel heard and seen and like you're empathizing. You have to hold space for all of the trauma and pain, but also be up to date on what are the best ways to treat each one of those situations effectively with EMDR. You also needed time to breathe between those 6 sessions a day. I certainly did. For me, that usually meant ideally 2, max 3 sessions back to back. So if I was doing 2 sessions back to back, that meant that I had 3-hour breaks in the day. So that would be at least an 8-hour day, right? Which usually meant my day had to, or but sometimes more because I just in terms of scheduling when it would work for people. So my day would start at 9 and end at 6. And that meant, you know, rushing out of the door before my kids got to school, and having someone else drop them off or, and getting back with, hardly any time to even think about cooking dinner and maybe an hour before they went to bed. I was also finding it really hard to keep everything straight, no matter how good my notes were, no matter how good I was doing, how good of a job I was doing at keeping up with my paperwork, which often wasn't very good. I was forgetting details about my clients' lives, not remembering important people. And, our clients, when they're paying out of network rate, I mean, just period, but certainly when you're offering a service that you're charging a lot for, they deserve us to be able to remember that stuff, right? These were some signs of burnout I was having. Some other ones that might resonate with you. Dreading the work week, having those Sunday scaries, as it were. If you've never felt that, I would describe it as the sinking feeling in your stomach on a Sunday afternoon as you're on the couch looking at your simple practice calendar for the week, wondering how the heck you're going to make it through. Maybe your heart starts racing. Maybe you can't muster up enough energy to be present at the barbecue or at the friend date or at the birthday party or even being present enough to binge watch your favorite show to relax. Um, you know, that's not a relaxing way to spend the weekend, but that often happens to us. Another sign that has happened to me a lot, waking up exhausted, even if you're getting plenty of sleep. And this can often manifest as feeling exhausted during the workday, maybe even noticing you're yawning or your eyes are feeling heavy in a session with a client. And no shame if this has happened to you. Okay. I think a lot of us feel guilty about this. It's not a sign that you're a terrible therapist. It's not a sign that you don't care. It's not a sign that you're totally bored by your client or by your work together, although that can be possible and could be a sign that maybe it's not a good fit or whatever. But it's, likely, that's more often the exception than the rule. I think that you're feeling burned out often and your system is just like, I can't take this. I can't do this. I can't do what this job requires of me right now. Um, Burnout, however it shows up, is often a sign of other needs that you have going unmet, right? Not necessarily a sign that you don't want to be a therapist anymore. And I think we can jump to that. And I would urge you to, before you go there, before you rip up your license, take down your little, your website, whatever, let's explore burnout as a possibility in some ways through that, right? Um, but I will say that like the longer you avoid addressing your burnout, the longer it takes to heal from it. Okay. So I've been through a variety of burnout episodes during my time as a therapist. And like I said, I'm experiencing it a little bit currently. And it has almost nothing to do with my clients and everything to do with how many other things are going on in my life. Um, so that's my responsibility as a clinician to address, right? So it doesn't affect my clinical work. Um, you know, certainly for me as a mom of three, a lot of it has to do with things that are going on with my kids always. Even on just a regular week, there's a lot to manage. But my oldest, my autistic daughter, who's 7 and in first grade, is herself exhibiting signs of school burnout right now. And we're having to make a variety of decisions about how to get her through the end of the school year, in the safest and healthiest way possible. And this might mean taking her out of school for the rest of the year. So anyway, there's a lot going on for her. There always is, but it's kind of escalating, ramping up now. And I need to give that a lot of my attention. And then, of course, we have all the other changes that are coming up very shortly for our family. The big move in July to Vermont from Pennsylvania, all that that entails, closing down my practice here. I just turned in my dissertation last week. It'll be a few weeks ago by the time this episode comes out. But, um, I'm feeling some burnout and exhaustion right now. So all the signs I'm describing are very real for me right now. And I'm very glad that I have been taking steps proactively for many months now to address this. My client load is much, much lighter thanks to intensive and because I have been iterating with clients as I prepare for the move. So that's helpful. I actually have some blank space on my calendar finally. Um, so yeah, if you're feeling burned out, intensives can be a game changer. You got fewer client hours, more money, and just a couple of clients maybe to juggle at a time, plus a much more boundaried relationship that ends relatively quickly. All of that can make our jobs feel so much more manageable. When we're less burned out, we can provide a much better service to the clients that we do see, right? Um, so I think that when you are feeling better about the work that you're doing and less burned out, um, it's really validating as a therapist because you start to see the results for your clients being a lot better. um, and like, for example, in an intensive, when you can really settle into the work with the client, they're going to start feeling better. They're going to, and their progress is going to be more rapid. And that can reduce your own burnout, right? When you actually see stuff working. And I think that all helps with burnout, and the better of a therapist you are, the more client referrals you're going to get. And that can also help you feel less burned out when you realize other people are seeing the value of what you do. Um, and I think another reason intensives reduce burnout is you're really making progress. So you're not just feeling like week after week, you're kind of stuck with the same problem with the same person. You're actually moving ahead. And, of course, It's so important. Holding space for a client is so incredibly valuable, even if we're not seeing, quote, tangible progress. But I do think tangible progress feels great. Um, and like I said, another thing that is great about intensives and reducing burnout is the boundary clinical relationship, right? It's not a relationship that goes on forever. You're not the on-call crisis therapist. All that is so important. When I offer my VIP day to other therapists, and this is going to also be a feature of my upcoming coaching program, which is going to be offered in the fall of 2024. Part of what we're going to do, what I do with VIP day clients, and what I'm going to do with the group program, is create a personalized burnout-proof schedule for you for each week and month of the year. Okay, it's personalized to you, and we're also creating a step-by-step implementation plan, which like how to get from where you are now to where you want to be in a year. Um, and and that includes going through your current client list, and we'll do this together one by one and deciding on what are you going to do with that each client? What's the timeline? How are you going to tell them? Are you going to ask them to do an intensive? Are you going to phase them out? Whatever. That's going to be part of this plan that we create. So just knowing that is something that I very intentionally address in my coaching work. So sign number 2, noticing your income isn't meeting your needs. So how would you know this? Well, there are a lot of ways. You might already know this, but I also want to mention that just like barely paying your bills every month does not mean that your needs are being met. Okay. Maybe your bare basic needs, but not anything that actually fills you up. And that's important as a therapist too. Right. But on the base level, if you're feeling a lot of strain, paying your bills every month, if you are not comfortably managing your student loans, we all have them. If you have financial goals, but you're not making any progress towards them, those are all signs that your income needs are not being met. And your needs are going to be individualized to you, right? And will vary widely based on who you are, the lifestyle you desire and need, the different financial responsibilities you may have, a mortgage, a sick family member, caring for children. Maybe you're contributing to someone's education, donating to causes that matter to you. Those are all financial responsibilities that are important. And there's many types of financial responsibilities as there are people. And so this is entirely personal to you, right? There's no $1 amount that each therapist should be making each month because everyone's lives are different. And you also need to have a sense of how much time you want and need to take off every year, how many days a week you want to work, maybe how many weeks a month you want to work, and factor that in when you're trying to figure out what income would meet your needs. You've got to have this sense of your expenses and of your financial goals and dreams to have any idea of what you need to be bringing in each month and how many hours you need to be working to bring this about. If that feels overwhelming to you and you're not sure about that number, there's a couple of great resources out there. One, and I'll link these in the show notes. One is from Tiffany McLean. Her company is called Lean and Make Bank, and she has a fun with fees calculator. I'll put the link in the show notes. And the other one is Felicia. She's also known as the Bad Therapist. She has something called the Magic Sheets, which also helps you calculate what you need to charge. So you can try those if you haven't before. And then you'll have a sense of what you need to charge to meet your goals. And you may notice that you're still feeling like something when you do that feels like too much. That 20 clients a week at $200 an hour just may not cut it for all the needs and justifiable wants you have at this life stage. You might need more money than that. Or maybe 20 clients a week feel impossibly hard. If that's the number you get, you're like, I can't do that. Maybe the thought of trying to squeeze more clients in to make to that necessary dollar amount makes you want to throw up. I get it. I have been there. So that tells me it's time for an intensives primarily or only practice. Intensives really give you permission to charge a higher rate, and here's why. Charging more per hour for intensives than your hourly rate is a totally defendable idea for so many reasons. One, the energy expenditure during an intensive is very significant, and you got to account for that. It's manageable when you're structuring your schedule so that you're not overburdened with clinical time, but you need to take that into account, right? You should have some rest days. Maybe you take a day off after every intensive day and some people might say, what? But maybe you need to offer the best service you can to clients. And so you got to factor that into the price. And you certainly shouldn't be scheduling someone else on the same day as an intensive. Like, no, please don't do that. So but again, that's something you have to factor into the price. The client wants you fully rested and focused on them. That's part of what they're paying for. So it's part of what you got to charge for. Another reason I think you should increase your hourly rate for intensives is that like a client gets so much more out of an hour of an intensive than they do out of a 53-minute session, right? In a regular session, you're checking in. How was your week? How was that thing we talked about last week? Did anything bad happen that we need to talk about? That's diverting you from the treatment plan, the EMDR treatment plan. So maybe you get to process for 20 minutes and then you got to close down and get ready to leave and go back to their life. Or maybe if you're on the computer, they have to get off the call and kind of wash their face and drink some water and be ready to go back to the workday. You just don't get that same amount of processing time that an hour of an intensive will give you. So I'd like to see that 1 hour of an intensive is equivalent to 2 hourly sessions, frankly, if not more. Okay. I think of an intensive of 6 months of EMDR therapy in 2 weeks. And so, yeah, high cost, high value. And if you're pricing intensives like this, 3 weeks a month will replace and maybe even outdo your 4 weeks of hourly clients. So, burnout and financial needs, intensives can solve them. And part of what we work on in any of my coaching packages is, in addition to figuring out your perfect schedule, right? Figuring out what you need to charge for an intensive and a step-by-step plan to implement that. How to market the right way to attract the clients who can pay and want to pay for a high-value service. Getting comfortable with charging like $5,000 for a 15-hour intensive. It's possible. People pay me that. Not many, but I don't need many. I need, for where I'm at in my business now, like max 2 a month, sometimes just 1 a month. I've got other income streams and just because of my energy levels right now. But yeah, max 24 a year. You can find 24 people in a year who will pay that. You can, but you have to do the work. And we might, there's other ways you can kind of scale up to that if it feels more comfortable to start at a certain point and then move up. We'll come up with your own individualized plan. So my last indicator that it's time to go all in on intensives is when you notice that a 15-minute session, or maybe your sessions are 45 minutes, or maybe they're 53, whatever, that it's starting to feel really short, particularly when you're going into phase 4 processing with someone. It's like, as you all know, we've got our mandatory sort of, re-engaging with the target, but that often happens. What is that, phase 8? That often happens when in a short session, after you've sort of been like, hey, how was your week? Anything big going on, anything you need to talk about. And that can take a good 10, 15 minutes in and of itself. And then you kind of get into okay, where were we last week? Let's check in on the side. Let's see if anything came up for you around that last week. Okay, let's assess and let's go. Hey, maybe you have 20 minutes total of processing time then, because you also have to spend your however many minutes at the end of the session, closure, making sure they're regrounded, making sure they're ready to go back out into the world, whatever that looks like. And that's just not a whole lot of processing time that you're going to get in that 50-minute session, right? And Francine Shapiro, if you go back into the big old EMDR book, she designed an EMDR initially, or her intention was for EMDR sessions to be 90 minutes, not 50. So guess what? If you're feeling that a 50-minute session is too short, you should be, because Francine Shapiro did not intend for EMDR to be done in 50-minute sessions. And it's just the convention of our fields of psychotherapy and our stupid insurance companies, which you heard me rant about a little bit last week. Those are the reasons that we do therapy in 50-minute sessions, not because it's the most clinically appropriate or effective. And again, the inventor of EMDR, the creator, also did not think a 50-minute session was effective. So what are some great reasons for a longer session? Well, I've already talked about this a bunch, but of course, you're going to get faster results. You're going to get more processing done. You're really going to focus on the EMDR part of what you're doing. Okay. It's not this long-term therapeutic relationship where there's a lot of like crisis of the week. There's a lot of supportive therapy. And look, I am all for all of that. But if that's not the kind of therapist you want to be and you want to be doing intensives and using that model, give yourself the option to do that, right? Don't let yourself become someone who you're spending 4 or 5 years working with someone and maybe not making the progress that you thought you would because you're playing a variety of roles as their therapist. Um, and also something that I think is really important is when you have longer sessions, you really get to kind of drop into the work. It can take a little while for someone to settle into a session and even a 50-minute session. And we're asking them to do trauma processing, very intense work. So, it could be that it takes 30 minutes, 45 minutes for them really to connect with the processing and be really connected with their bodies. Like I see this a lot that a lot of clients struggle, particularly with the somatic element of EMDR. And it takes them a little while. Like we might have to do some exercises for body connection. We might have to do some breathing together. Might have to get them to really slow down and do like a 5 senses grounding exercise, which all takes time, but it's time well spent if you have that time, right? If you don't have that time and you spend 10 minutes of your session doing that, and that's 10 minutes of a 50-minute session that you could have spent processing doing something else, right? So there's just so many benefits to having that time. And you don't feel like you're constantly looking at the clock, which makes you less present, takes you out of the work, um, and just like is agitating for our nervous systems, which is not the space we want to be in when we're doing this kind of deep work, right? Um, and I do have clients who really take longer to kind of get into that space. And so it feels really good to them not to be worrying about the clock. I've had clients say to me when we started doing intensives, yeah, the sessions were feeling really short to me too. And they also noticed that we were spending a lot of time on things that weren't exactly what they thought EMDR was going to be, right? So it clients are aware of this and they really respond positively to having more time and more attention. Um, you're going to be very focused too with an intensive. That person is coming for a reason. You don't have anybody else booked on those days. You have all this time. You're going to be really treatment plan focused, which is awesome. Um, Another reason why I think, and this is something that might not apply to all of you, but it might at some point in your career, that when you have a client who's dissociative or like significantly dissociative, having more time is really important. And I work with dissociative identity disorder and have a lot of training in that area. So I do see these clients more than some people do. But like if you're doing really extensive parts work with a dissociative client, a 50-minute session does not really work very well. If you're actually at the stage of work with a dissociative client where you're doing some EMDR, they might dissociate during the processing. It's actually quite normal and not as scary as and dangerous as we might have been told that it is. I'm actually going to do another episode about that in the future about what to do when someone dissociates in your office or has a flashback during an intensive. But in any case, you need that time to make sure you're safely regrounding them. Um, and then have time to continue doing the work you're doing. If you're feeling really rushed, it's very, very anxiety inducing to have a client having a dissociative flashback and you realize you have 10 minutes left in the session and then you have somebody right after them. That is not a fun experience. Okay. And I will tell you that when someone's dissociating, if you're rushing them to come back to being present, that doesn't work. Okay. Rushing is like the antithesis of presence. So I really, really think it's so important to if you work with dissociative clients, know that like time is really necessary and all the different parts of them want to have their airtime. And it's hard to do that in 50 minutes. So, for someone who works with dissociative clients, and because all of you work with trauma clients, you do have some dissociative clients, whether you know it or not. More time is so, so, so valuable. And I think I've said this before, but I have a few clients with DID and we actually meet weekly for 2 hours. There's some of my exceptions to my intensive only approach because there's just not a lot of really skilled DID clinicians. So, I really love working with that population, one, and I feel like an obligation to maintain that relationship. So but we still often we work intensively most of the time because a 50-minute session just does not cut it with that population. I'll get to the end of our 2 hours and it still feels too short. So I'm actually experimenting with what like a dissociative specific intensive in a more structured way could look like, but that's something I'm just playing around with for who knows. Maybe I'll talk about that in the future. Like how would you craft an intensive that's very, very specifically oriented towards someone with a dissociative disorder? And what are the goals? But anyway, I'll tell you more about that at some time. The other thing about having really longer sessions, and I think I have talked about this before, is like therapists can be afraid of phase 4 processing. And sometimes clients can be too. And clients, if they sense that we're afraid of it, they certainly are going to be afraid of it. And a lot of this comes from some of the fear mongering we get in our training about how EMDR is hard and scary and dangerous and blah, blah, blah. So a 15-minute session, you can do a really good job at avoiding ever going into processing at all. You can spend the whole 50 minutes on your problem of the week after week after week, which is not to say that you're not doing good work, but it's not why that person is there. Okay. If they're sitting with you for 4 or 5 hours in a day, you just can't do that. And also, if they're sitting with you and they know that their time with you is limited to 15 hours, you are not going to dawdle. You will have to face the reality of you need to be doing phase 4 with this person. Okay. So I really think that all those reasons are really, really valid in terms of like why the 50-minute hour can feel too short and that it often is, and why longer sessions are just so great in so many ways. I will sing the praises of them forever. And if something that you worry about is, yeah, but what do I do during all of that time that I'm sitting with the client? Believe me, you're talking to the right person. I have a whole structure that I use for my intensives and in my VIP day, one-on-one coaching, and in my upcoming group program. You learn all of that. I give you my exact format. We talk about all the different clinical tools I use, what we do when we get stuck, how to really structure that time. So you're not just like, oh my God, I'm sitting with this person for 5 hours. Now what? I promise you, the time goes a lot faster than you think. And it is very, very engaging and worthwhile. So you will learn all of that from me if we work together. Um, so yes, today was all about the top 3 signs you're ready to move to offering intensives in your practice. And those 3 reasons were: 1, you're feeling burned out; 2, your money needs are not being met by your current practice; and 3, that 50-minute hour is just feeling way too short. If this resonated with you and you have more questions, please reach out either on Instagram at Future Template Parent, or please check out my website, www.futuretemplateparent.com, if you have not done so already. Next week, we're going to dive back into a more clinical topic, a topic that's really fun and exciting for me, all about the pre-verbal trauma processing protocol and how to use it in an intensive. I'm going to be looking at the book where there are no when there are no words. I can never remember which it is. When probably makes more sense. It's a Sandra Paulson book, all about the pre-verbal trauma protocol in EMDR, and I'll be giving you my quick and dirty overview of what that looks like in an intensive, how to use it. So I hope that will be informative for all of you. Thank you as always for joining me and listening. I hope you all have a great week, and I will talk to you next week. Take care, everybody. Bye.